Hello, welcome to Watercolor by Scarlett Damen. Today we're going to do a class assignment. I would like you guys to get out your favorite brush, to roll it to a point, add a little bit of water, pick one color or a few if you prefer, and practice making lines. I've done this a few times. I've talked about it a few times. I'm not sure how many people are actually watching the old videos or going back and reading the old posts, but it's really important. So I'm going to go over today the actual different types of things we want to do when we're practicing making lines. The first thing you want to do is practice making your lines going from thick to thin, and then thin to thick, and then thin to wide, and thin to wide. Okay, does that make sense? So we're going to go from, and I haven't done any drawing at all in a while, so we're going to go from thin. We're going to first do a thin line. Now the key with doing a thin line is, if you guys can see, ooh, you can't really see that color, can you? Maybe we'll have to mix it with something else. Here, we'll make more of an olivey green here. Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, so first thing I want to do is roll the brush with my fingers. It can be a little difficult. Sometimes the brush feels like it wants to jump out of your hand. The next thing is, if I was using a small brush, I would use my pinky as a guide to tell me where I am. And you could still do this if your hand's up. See, my hand's up, so the pinky is my guide. And then, okay, and then just bring it down. Now the key is you want to move your arm, not your hand. If I was to move my hand, I would end up with, you know, my hand's only going to go so far, right? And that's not going to work. If I also, the more vertical your brush is, the more likely you're able to use the tip. So let's practice that for a second. This is way up. Okay, you can see that I'm almost totally straight. That's the first thing. The second thing is being able to gauge where you are off of the paper. So hold it up, keep your hand at that same height, bring it down. Now you can see just with what I'm doing here that I'm getting better. And this is kind of the warm-up that I would like to do before I paint. If I find that it's going too far, if it's getting too thick, I just lift it back up a bit. I'm going to attempt to try to move my hand here, because sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it's harder to pull your whole arm. And I also want to keep that to a point, so let's see if we can add something else in here color-wise. Make it a little darker. There we go. There is a grumpy squirrel outside. Can you guys hear it? So, staying nice and high on the tip. Go from the bottom up. Now here's a very interesting idea. Which is better for you? Is it easier for you? It's easier for me to go from the bottom up. Did you see that? I think I tend to have more control. Whereas going from the top down, somewhere in the middle it tends to bump. Not always. And this is a pretty big brush, right? This is a size 6. So it's a pretty big brush to start with for doing really fine lines. Now, shorter lines, let's, again, try to keep it the same distance off the paper. Very good. Okay, now we're going to go from thick to thin. So we're going to put our paintbrush down, drag down. We're going to lift our brush up, all the way up to super thin. Then we're going to slowly go back down to fat. Then up to thin. Down to fat. Now, if you imagine you're painting some water, this could be a very useful thing. If we want that fine line, and then we want a wave, then we want the fine line, then another crashing wave, right? In fact, if we did that in blue, more blue, so we kind of get the feeling that that could be some kind of water on the horizon. Now, obviously, this is a very specific type of line, but it could be interesting. It could also be a beautiful pattern for a skirt. And it's fun to get the rhythm going, to go up, down, not to care so much about how thick you're going or how thin you're going. Need a little more water. Just to kind of bring it up, pull it across, bring it up, pull it across. This is pretty fat. Let's bring it up really high. There we go. Neat, huh? Okay, next we want to practice lines that almost touch. So this is very important. Let's do something like a squiggly line. Let's do it almost on a vertical. And let's do a second one right next to it. Gently following the first line. You can totally see how I'm improving. I can see how I'm improving just within the last few minutes. I woke up recently, haven't had my morning coffee. I'm a little stiff, and this warm-up is wonderful. So again, I'm still using that size 6 brush. This is not a fine brush that I'm using. And that's important because you can tell that these are really small lines. And if we go the other way, see what happens. We go this way, up, down, down, little squiggle and over, and then coming back. I can hear the hummingbird outside the window. The chicken making a slightly growly noise. She's a very odd chicken. And the goats are off in the bedroom snoring. Oh, it's too cute. And obviously the blue jays and the other birds outside. So this is this is something I think we should continue. Now, I don't want to make this video so long that you guys are bored out of your mind, and more importantly, so I can't actually upload it because it's too long to get it online, because we have 3 megs of uploading ability here out in the woods. Love being in the woods, don't love the 3 meg internet. So I will keep it rather short, but I will say that I think I would like to see you guys doing exactly this. Okay, so let's do these lines. Try to keep them even. And once you're done doing enough even lines and you like the way it looks, try to do them close together. Let's see how close we can get them without touching. Don't worry if they're perfect or not. It really doesn't matter. It's just a warm-up. The objective here is to get loose and comfortable. Even though we're not actually getting loose at all, what we're doing is getting more tight. But it doesn't matter because we're working those muscles. We're getting them to respond. Now we also, I think I went over this already, but we want to vary the direction of our brush. So we don't always want to go one way. We want to go up, we want to go down, we want to go back, we want to go forward. So let's do something unique. Let's imagine there's a painting picture here. Let's bring that line. That was a pretty good line. My hand is guiding my distance. And I'm going away from my body, which is always easier. And let's see, I'll twirl this again. If you guys notice, my whole body is moving. This is a very awkward kind of position. Those ones did touch. Okay, let's try the other way. This time again, using my hand as a guide. Oh, I'm seeing great improvement. Of course, every time I say I'm seeing great improvement, I get a little too fumbled here. Okay, let's attempt for some uniform here. The last and final part of this little tutorial is we're going to hold the brush in different ways, and we're going to use different sides of the brush. So I want to pick up some color for this. Let's use, maybe we'll go back to the quinacridone gold, but perhaps a little thicker. Okay, we've obviously been using the point, right? We've been using the point of the brush a lot in all the different ways that one could draw with the point of the brush. Right. Now, there are other ways. We have the side of the brush, which is literally this side, and if you pull it and you run out of paint, you'll end up with dry brushing, which can be very beautiful. And obviously, if you keep it loaded with paint, you won't end up with dry brushing. You really have to keep it quite loaded. And if we were doing a wash, we would use the side of the brush. That bump, that little drop of water, and this little drop of water is going to create a run back in both cases. So in order to get rid of that, I gently dry my brush a little bit, which is now considered, it's called a thirsty brush, although I like to call it a damp brush. Okay, and this one too. Now sometimes it depends on the paper. If you're using really good, really high quality paper like Arches, you're not going to have as many runbacks because the way the paper works, it just doesn't create runbacks. It's quite amazing. Not necessarily the cheaper paper, but definitely the high quality paper tends to avoid them. So this is using the side of the brush. Let's add some red here, make a little bit of brown. Okay, next one, we're going to use the flat, or the foot of the brush, and see what we can do with that. Just like a little footprint. Ooh, not enough water in there. I think of lots of ways that this can be useful in a painting. For example, if you were doing a row of people and you wanted the overall shadows and shapes and bodies of the people, and then later you were going to put on heads and hats and some details and such. So it'd be a great way to get the overall shape. You could also use it in maybe in a water scene for some fish. If we do the footprint and then we pull it, ooh, it's like a beautiful whale. Let's try that again. Footprint and pull. Let's add some blue so we can see this better. Oh, it's still a little wet. Okay, so maybe we want to put some fish down here. Then it all depends on how you move the brush. If we bring it down, if we bring it up, what kind of different shapes are we going to get? Because that's really what this is about. So we've got the side of the brush, we've got the footprint, we've got the point, the tip. I like doing the tip. I like practicing the tip. I think it's very, very important if you can figure out how to paint perfect little fine lines. Using the tip on a stand-up and a short little thing, you end up with dots, which is what I just did. So itty-bitty little dots. You get some pretty fine details. Again, this is all with the 6th brush, right? And this is what people would consider a very large brush. Not super large, big enough. And that's not the case. You can go from really large strokes to really tiny strokes with a simple brush like this. Okay, and the last thing is to vary how we hold the brush. So for everything I've done here, I've been holding it like this, which is the traditional way you'd hold a pencil. Now let's imagine we do it under. So we hold it under. And I'm telling you, I haven't done this in a few days, so everything will be different. So we go across, up. It feels different. It feels looser. I definitely want to go back to where I was, but I'm not going to. Now if I hold it again like this, what does that do? How does that feel? Just do it a little faster. You have less control if you hold a brush in a way you're not familiar with. And the last thing I want to do is twirl. I'm going to start twirling the brush as I go. So, and in this odd way of holding it, okay? Let's come way down here. And let's attempt to twirl the brush as I pull it. This gives really interesting organic lines. Some little mountains in the back here. Okay, yes, and the very last thing we should talk about is lifting the brush. Lifting the brush. So let's grab a slightly different color paint. I'm going to attempt to do something way over here. Okay, so lifting the brush. We've got the brush down, we lift the brush, we have a drop. There's a drop. There should be a drop. If we're trying to do a straight line, but we keep lifting the brush, of course now it's not going to do it, we're going to get, there we go, see that? Every time we lift that brush we get a little pile of water. Now if you're looking for run backs, that will be really helpful because each of these little piles of water are going to create a tiny cauliflower. This is also a really nice way to do the side brush. Your class assignment, if it isn't clear by now, is to take some time to do a warm-up, and I would recommend doing a warm-up every single morning. It will make such a difference to your work every single morning, just for 5 minutes. Have a small space somewhere in your house where you can quickly pull out your paints, get out the brush you want to practice using, and just scribble through it. There's nothing to this. You don't have to paint anything. You don't have to draw anything. You don't have to produce anything that looks like anything. You don't ever have to use it. In fact, these paintings are really interesting if we chop them up into little strips and I use them as bookmarks or something like that later. Like they would make very interesting bookmarks, especially if maybe I cut it in half and so these are bookmarks and those are bookmarks. Yeah, I highly recommend you guys do this, and when you do, take a photo of whatever you've done, just a quick snapshot, and come over to the Patreon community and post it there so I can see what it looks like, because that will make me very, very happy to know that a few of you are actually following along with me and doing the class assignments. I'm Scarlett, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Toodaloo!